Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Thriving in Intersectionality podcast. I love being in space with leaders from across the world around different topics, around this conversation on identity, leadership, and belonging. And I'm excited, as usual, to bring you my guest today. Before that, I'm going to set the stage on intersectionality. What is intersectionality? Intersectionality is a framework that recognizes how multiple aspects of identity, such as gender, race, ethnicity, immigration experience, culture, and so much more. How all of these identity categories, how they interact to shape our personal experiences of the world, including leadership and opportunity. And I love curating this space where leaders with diverse lens are able to share their own lived experience so that we can explore leadership not just as a strategy, but as something that is shaped by our lived experience and perspectives. And so today I am excited to have Julie with me. Hi, Julie.
Hello there.
I would let her introduce all of her layers and work, but I will just say Julie Pham is a Cambridge trained social scientist, an award winning community organizer, an Amazon best-selling author, a TEDx speaker, and so much more. Check the show note. She's also a Vietnamese-born, American-raised refugee, and I know that's just one of the many layers to that you have to you, Julie. So I'm going to turn this over to you and allow you to give us a little more about you. So, Julie, when you think about the word intersectionality, first of all, welcome. Did I say welcome? Welcome.
I can feel
Thank you
your
for
welcome, Dr.
joining.
Adeyemo.
I was like, I want to jump right in, Julie. I'm ready to go. I love when I have guests that I'm also curious about because, again, I feel like this space has also developed into a learning space for me personally as a practitioner, as a leader, right? So I'm excited to get to know you, Julie. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me on your show. I was really excited to learn about your show because when thinking about intersectionality, I like to tell people that we belong to multiple cultures, communities, and identities at the same time.
At the
And
same
that they are
time,
in, and then they're all influencing us a little differently. Some days I wake up and I feel, oh, I really feel my Generation X coming out. Some days I feel being the oldest sister. Some
yeah.
days I feel more American, and other days I feel more Asian.
Mm,
And so I think a lot of that is, I like to think of as curiosity-based inclusion. How do we learn about one another? So I was
how do
really
we learn?
excited to learn about your show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. All right, Julie. So beyond the bio, and if you're listening, you're gonna get to see the show notes and I hear a lot more about Julie's work and what she's spending her time doing now. But I like to take my guest, I like to go deeper behind the
Mhm,
scene
mhm,
with my guest, sort of how you got here. So first, when you personally think of the word intersectionality,
mhm,
can you tell us a little bit more about those categories of your identity
mhm,
that you want us to, you want to spotlight for us that we
mhm.
might not know and that has really shaped your leadership journey?
Yeah, so a really important part of my identity is being a Vietnamese refugee. I came to the US in 1979 with my parents as boat people. We fled communist Vietnam. So being a refugee is definitely one of them. Being a Asian born, Vietnamese born American, because I feel very American. I grew up here, whole, and I actually learned Vietnamese later on. And yet being born in Vietnam is different from my other Asian American friends who maybe have their families have been here for numerous generations and they have more distance from that
Mm,
heritage and from that identity. And also being a woman is a really important part of my identity as well.
I love it. And I love what you said briefly earlier that some days we wake up feeling something
Hmm, hmm,
really top of mind, and other
hmm,
days, like, we don't have to choose. We are all of
hmm.
that. And different seasons, different days, we might feel a little more of some layer than the other, right?
And it depends on really who we're with as well.
Yeah,
And
context.
so I know people are critical of the word code switching sometimes, and I actually think of that as strategic communication. I get to code
Like
switch.
it.
I get to appear different, to emphasize different aspects of my identity when I'm with different people. And so, and I feel like I get to, not that I have to, but that I get to. And that
Mm.
means that I actually get to have a lot, my friend group is a lot more diverse because I get to be in
Mm.
different groups and I don't feel that I'm being fake with any of them. I just feel like, okay, this is, for example, I just had lunch with my friend Mohammed, who is a Somali and Somali refugee, and we were talking about a refugee experience. And so really leaning in there, and that conversation might be a little different if I'm hanging out with my Asian American friends. So,
Right.
mhm,
Oh, thank you for saying that. I've never really phrased it like that, but I've also kind of struggled with how to communicate that to people about this code switch sometimes that we say as sort of a bad thing.
mhm,
Is sometimes it allows us to show up in different spaces. It's kind of why we have different communities. I'm the
mhm,
same way. I'm also Nigerian born, and I think of how I am with my Nigerian friends.
mhm,
It's so freeing to be able to be with them. And then there are other friends that are more my professional circle. They are
mhm,
diverse. They are not all Nigerians, but the way I
mhm,
show up with them is also very much more professional
mhm,
and
mhm,
entrepreneurial. It doesn't make me less Nigerian. It
mhm,
just makes me more able to relate with them in the context of our conversation. So I like that.
mhm. It's like we get to speak different dialects, right?
Yep.
It's not just, oh, I'm being fake me. And I think that there are situations where people do feel that they have to fake. So
Yeah.
I don't want to dismiss that feeling. I feel that in I'm really I guess I feel very fortunate. Maybe this is also because I have my own business. I watch my parents having their own business. So kind of getting to be more of who we are in different spaces,
Mm, yeah.
and just but emphasizing different aspects.
Yeah. And I think the difference, as you're just saying, I think the difference is when you have to do it to
Mhm,
survive,
mhm,
and it's very heavy and it's so much pressure. And
mhm,
and a lot of that, happens in the workplace.
mhm,
It's where you can't even show any version of yourself that feels close to what you recognize.
mhm,
And
mhm.
you feel like that's the only way you can survive. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes people um, feel like if I show this part of myself, then I have to also do the work of explaining, and they don't want to do that work. And
Mm,
so for me, I'm actually okay with explaining.
mm,
And so, and maybe that's I mean, we're both trained as academics. It's like there's that teaching part. It's like it's okay. We expect people
yeah.
not to know, and it's okay to share.
Yeah.
But I know some people are just, I don't want to have to go through that part of explaining who I am.
Over and
Uh,
over again.
and I also want to, sometimes people don't understand the difference that between refugee and immigrant. Immigrant being a very broad category, and refugee is a subset of that. Because I think in the US, oftentimes there's this emphasis on immigrant and the American dream. And when we talk about people coming to the US, there is a big focus on the pull factors. What pulls
Mm,
people to the US? It's for, say, economic reasons, and it's what's pulling them there, which kind of centers America. And I
mm,
think what we don't talk enough about is the push factors. What
mm,
pushes people to leave their homeland?
mm,
Because for my parents, they met in law school. They were upper middle class and my father had served in the South Vietnamese military. And so after the war ended in 1975, he was forced to go to a communist, they call it re-education camp, but it was really a prison camp.
mm,
And he spent 3 years there. And so when he got out, he said, I'm afraid to stay. And there were a lot of South Vietnamese military um, who were being punished by the communist government. And so we had to leave. And so
mm,
that's the push factor. What pushes you to leave your homeland?
mm,
And there's a poem by this Somali British poet Warshan Shir, and it's called Home. And in the poem, she writes, "No one puts their children on a boat unless it's safer than the land they're leaving, unless the water is
mm,
safer than the land they're leaving." So
mm.
no one puts their children on a boat unless the water is safer than the land they're leaving. And so I think that really gets at the refugee experience, which is different from, okay, I want more economic opportunities versus I really feel my freedom and my livelihood being threatened.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you so much for this rich conversation. It's funny because I structure these conversations in three parts in my head. We talk about the intersectionality and we talk about the career path. and we talk about the insights, right? But it's very loose in terms of timing. And I think this is the longest I've ever been forced to just sit in this first category and talk about intersections. And I can tell the academia aspect of your life or your journey, because you are so good at like really explaining. I've never thought of because I am an immigrant,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
I've
you're not a
always tried to
refugee,
explain I'm not a
right?
refugee, and I've always tried to
There's a
explain
difference.
that to
There's a difference.
people. And I haven't had the language that you just used right now, the push and the pull. Because
Mhm,
for me, my family is still back in Nigeria.
mhm,
Nigeria still represents safety.
mhm, mhm,
Nigeria still represents a place where I can go back
mhm,
anytime. It's
mhm,
different from the push experience, where there is I have a book called Thriving in Intersectionality, and in the first year it was released, we had the same conversation with another, um I guess it would be more of a refugee for her. She's also an immigrant, but we talked about no two immigrants being the same. And
mhm,
she had more of a, I don't ever want to go back. It's a very
mhm,
negative and heavy experience. And I had the more of a, I want to go back. I
mhm,
miss home. And we talked
mhm,
about where both are very valid.
mhm.
And so but I like the pull and the push, the way you explain that, because I think that's important when you talk about immigrant experience. Immigrant, refugee, not the same, very different.
And my parents never went back to Vietnam. We left in 1979. I went back to Vietnam for the first time in 2002, and I lived on and off in Vietnam as an adult while I was doing my doctoral research in my 20s. But my parents, they could never bring themselves to go
To go
back because
back.
for them, they had lost their homeland.
Mm,
And so my parents founded the longest running Vietnamese newspaper in the Pacific Northwest. And for many years, when I was in Vietnam, the newspaper was blocked. I could not access the website because the communist government blocked it. So that just gives you a sense of how they really felt that their freedom was still limited. It wasn't
mm.
until I think maybe, oh, I can't remember, maybe 10 years ago that I could access the newspaper from
Wow.
Vietnam.
From Vietnam, not
Yeah.
even, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Growing up, I could not appreciate that. I went to
Mm,
Berkeley, which is a very progressive school, right? And I just, oh, my parents don't really understand. It wasn't until living in a communist country did I
mm,
understand what that meant and the
yeah.
limitations of freedom of speech. Could I appreciate what it means to be American?
Mm. Thank you. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for your authenticity, and thank you for the work that you do too, which we'll get to in a minute. But I wanted to shift gear and walk a little bit through your career journey.
Mhm,
So a lot of our audience are, professionals and career workplace leaders, as well as, entry level, mid career levels. And so I like to also, beyond the work you do now, I like to start with, how did you get to where you are now? Can you
mhm, mhm,
walk through your career path a little bit? Maybe
mhm.
as far back as you want, like how you
Yes.
chose your program and all the transitions along the way.
Yeah, so I mentioned before that my parents started the first or the longest running, the first private and the longest running Vietnamese newspaper. And why that's really important is because I think of them as the hustlers among hustlers. I watched them be entrepreneurial. I grew up in a very entrepreneurial community. And what that meant is I think I have a much higher risk tolerance than other people. But, with a lot of immigrants and refugees, they really emphasize stability. And so growing up,
Stability.
oh, you want to be a doctor, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer. And so I thought when I went to school, I was going to be a lawyer. And then I realized quickly, no, I didn't want to go into law. I thought then I would become an academic and become a historian. And so I ended up getting my PhD in history. And it wasn't until I was finishing up my dissertation did I realize I don't want to stay in academia. And I'd done all the things that you needed to do, publish and teach and all of that stuff. And instead business was calling to me. And so I decided to return to Seattle to help run my family's newspaper. And this was in 2008. This was the start of the Great Recession and the start of the global decline of the newspaper industry. And here I am working at a Vietnamese newspaper, and that was the best education I ever got. That's where I got my real life MBA. I worked alongside my family for 3 years, and I learned so much about selling, about marketing, about just how to create something. And honestly, there's no better way to learn about business than working in a small business.
Working
And also during this time, I where we were in Seattle is one of the most ethnically diverse parts of the country. And so then I started organizing, and this is where my community building came into play, and bringing together other ethnic media and other ethnic media because we were all struggling. And so this is where I actually started to get a much more diverse network of friends. My friend Mohammed, who I mentioned earlier, he runs Runta, the Somali newspaper, and so we all just got to get to work together, and so that was a great education. And then after 3 years, I just thought I need to move to a bigger organization. I'm working with 8 people. Half of them have the same last name as me because it's a family newspaper, and the tech industry is really big in Seattle, and so then I started working in the tech industry. And I spent nearly the next decade there doing a lot of interesting work. The last 6 years was at a nonprofit that worked at that advocated for the tech industry, and that's where I got my second real life PhD in organizational development. So I went from history to really learning how do organizations work, and I really applied this community building lens to it. And then at the end of 2020, I was just, I feel called to start my own thing, to do my own writing. And I knew I couldn't do it as an employee. I knew if I was going to write, I had to leave the best job I ever had because I loved my job. But I felt called to start my own company, Curiosity Base. And so I started that in 2021, the start of the Great Recession. Oh, sorry. In 2021, we were in the middle of the pandemic.
Middle of the pandemic. I know. I did feel. I knew exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and my father, and I remember telling my dad that I was going to leave my cushy executive job to start my own company. And I was really worried about what he was going to say because, again, refugees value stability. And he said, I'm so happy for you because now you're going to have freedom and you never have to worry about losing your job again. Because I got laid off twice when I was working in the tech industry. And so that's when I realized, wow, I witnessed my parents take so many risks. And that's why I started my story with my parents' story, because they really influenced how I work today.
Yeah. And I think people is it underestimate or emphasize that yearning for stability when you come from a history of maybe things not being stable and how much you can. But I think it was already in your blood. You were ultimately going to go into entrepreneurship. It was just a matter of time. But I also know how much our parents, do value and how much we value it for them. We want them to not have to worry about their kid, knowing that you have a stable, cushy job. So I think it's funny that you talk about being laid off too, because these days I tell people there is no job security anywhere.
Absolutely.
Not as an entrepreneur.
Is your own.
I mean, we in your own, because I also started my own thing in 2020, moved to full entrepreneurship. And so now I talk to people that are trying to figure out, should I stay? Should I, there is no perfectly stable space. As an entrepreneur, it is hard. There are days where you're like, I really wish I had a steady 2-week salary coming in. And there are days where you're like, I'm loving the flexibility and the freedom that I get building my own thing and pouring my passion into it. So thank you for sharing that. I think the third part then really is where I try to bring it together, right? You have such a rich leadership and intersectionality journey when it comes to your identity and how it's blended, and then also career journey. And so for those listening that maybe they can relate with your experience either as a refugee, from different countries, from whatever part of the world, right? Or as somebody maybe starting off career in small business, small family-owned business, and then moving to corporate and then moving to entrepreneurship. So you've touched it all. I want to turn sort of your experience to insights for professionals, right? If they're also navigating all that now, what are some of the things that the world of work is sort of at, like, I don't know, like a turning point right now? I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it's
Mm-hmm.
shifting. Things are changing when it comes to the workplace. What are some advice you will give them? Some of the things that helped you make those decisions? Maybe some of the things that made it work for you, and knowing what you know right now that people should be doing to build their career for the future, for the next 3, 5 years.
Mm. So I'll go back to that conversation I had with my father when he said, "I'm so happy for you." And what that made me realize was when we talk about success, we often talk about what does it look like? How much money are we going to make? What are we going to be able to buy with our big salaries? And what we don't ask is, what does success feel like?
Mm.
What does success feel like? And so when my father said, "I'm so happy for you, you're going to have freedom," that's what I realized. Wow, that's what success feels like to me.
Yeah.
And that means not having to ask permission, because I loved getting my salary, right? I loved getting my benefits and my health insurance. And I also knew that the cost was I constantly had to ask permission. I had to
Mm.
get anything I wrote had to be vetted by PR, right? Like, is this okay because as an executive at an organization, what I
You
say,
represent.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
representing. So one is to think about the difference of what does success look like and what does it feel like, and to make sure that they're aligned. And so that's one thing. Another thing that's very specifically from being a refugee is my parents always told me, be proud of being a refugee, because we are so resilient. Look at what we've been able to do with so little. And so another tip is ask for help. I watched my parents ask for help so often because getting capital was very difficult. Getting bank loans was really difficult. You kind of actually have to have some money to borrow money in the US.
I
And
know.
right. And so I saw my parents and just how people would ask each other, "Can I borrow this?" Not just money, but can I borrow space? Can I borrow equipment? Can you help me out do this thing? And so I think if you're going to actually, it's not just for being an entrepreneur, anyone ask for help. There's a stat, 90% of the help that's given in the workplace is because someone asked for it. It's answering a
Mm.
request. So think about how much we are leaving on the table.
Mm.
And then this is a tip that is, I think, specifically for entrepreneurs. And that is, when I was an employee, I managed my time, right? Because you've got 40 hours a week, right? And they expect you to work those 40 hours a week. As an entrepreneur, I manage my energy.
Mm.
I manage my energy. So what that means is I'm thinking about, am I doing work that gives me energy or that takes away energy? And so what parts of the work do I need to delegate? Do I need to outsource? Even if that means I have to pay for it. One of the things I
Mm.
did when I started my company was I was actually an employer from the get-go, which was a risk, right? To have employees from the get-go. Most people who do what I do, they are solopreneurs for quite a while. And I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to work with other people. And I there I need to save my brain space for the parts of the work that I am uniquely capable and talented and skilled in doing, and
Mm.
to get other people to help me with the other parts. And so that's something to think about, is, am I managing my energy well?
Mm.
So those are just some tips for your listeners.
Those are deep tips. And I'm learning that too. Because I was like, this constant struggle with time. I'm a mom, I have a few businesses. And I think about how I explain to people some parts of my work that I would do any day, that I
Hmm.
don't take vacation for. Like hosting conversations like this is one of it. And
Hmm.
I always tell people, like, this is not work for me.
Hmm.
This energizes me.
Hmm.
This if I'm not in the mind space for it, I wouldn't do it. I would reschedule. But being able to like leverage technology to meet cool people and learn about their journey and curate these stories, that's not energy draining for me.
Hmm.
That's energy giving. And
Hmm.
so I want to be able to do that.
Hmm.
So I love, manage your time, yes, but manage your energy as well,
Hmm.
in whatever you're doing. And I think maybe so for people that are trying to figure out, should I go fully entrepreneur, should I keep staying in corporate, maybe that's also a lens they could use. How much time are you really spending doing the things that give you energy,
Hmm.
versus spending 40 hours a week draining your energy and not having a refuel time?
Hmm. Hmm. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. And then before we wrap up, I did want to touch on your work a little bit. And seven forms of respect. I'll touch on that a little bit as well. So you've had quite an amazing journey with career, with work. Tell us a little bit about what you do now, and that framework of respect. I mean, as a consultant, I'm definitely curious about that. So if you could like give us a high level of what
Yes.
that was about, what led to it, and what it means.
So my company is called Curiosity Based, and we help people practice curiosity in the world, starting in the workplace. So my book and the framework, Seven Forms of Respect, it's about how we can agree on how respect feels. We disagree on what does it look like. So, for example, some people want to be CC'd on all emails. They feel included when they are CC'd on emails. And other people are just only CC me if you need me to do something. Otherwise, don't fill up my box, right? Don't fill up my inbox. And so that's just one small example of how we can have different ideas of what respect means. And it's actually rooted, Seven Forms of Respect is rooted in curiosity around respect. How do I, Dr. Lola, get curious about how you think about respect? And let me tell you how I think about respect. And that assumes we have different ways of thinking about it. Right. And that's a shift from saying, you need to respect me. And because that assumes that we mean the same thing by respect.
Right.
And in this intersectional, earlier I said that we all belong to multiple communities, cultures, and identities at the same time. And they impact how we think about respect. I am an oldest daughter. I think I'm always right. And I have to remind myself that I'm not. Right. But that comes through. Sometimes my oldest daughter oldest sister is really coming out in the way that I treat people. Sometimes I'm very protective. And that's just part of my identity that's shining through and influences how I think about respect.
Yeah. And I'm curious how you got into that, because I can definitely see your lens and your story and your experience coming to that. How did you come about the work that led to Seven Forms of Respect?
Well, so there was this epiphany moment that I had, which was, so there are three things. One was this epiphany moment where I was speaking on a panel on leadership, and one person said, in the audience said, I'm trying to get my coworker to trust me, and I'm doing all these things and he won't trust me. And I said, well, maybe it's like the 5 love languages. Maybe you are telling him all about your personal life and he just wants you to show up on time. Right. And so that was kind of an aha. There's also my lived experience looking back, growing up Vietnamese at home, American at school, and then living in Germany, France, England, and Vietnam as an adult, and seeing that respect meant different things. How we treat each other meant different things in different places. And then just the research itself, asking people, because my research actually started with how do you want to be treated at work? And then people kept talking about respect. They kept using that word. And then I said, well, what does that mean to you? And that's when I noticed people were describing it differently. So in retrospect, I look back in that community building work that I did, and friction would definitely come up. You've got people from really different backgrounds. Friction comes up, and we don't have language. And so that's when what prompted me was, wow, we need language to talk about this. So my dream one day is that people will talk about the 7 forms of respect the way we talk about love languages. And we'll say, and I can say, these are my forms of respect. What are yours? And what that assumes is we want to respect each other. We have different ways of talking about it, which is different from respect me. I am respecting you. Right. That arguing over the definition.
Or saying you are disrespecting me.
Yeah, exactly.
What if I showed you respect the way I had been taught?
Exactly. You're doing the golden rule. Right.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. And I think you didn't also talk about that part of living in multiple countries, because that exposure to different cultures, I think is also important. You said you had lived in
Germany, France, Vietnam, and England.
Oh, wow.
As an adult. And
periods of time.
And even you live in California, I live in the Pacific Northwest. Even those have different cultures. Right?
I know. And I think it shifts things. It kind of expands your thoughts and your mind when you have stepped out and lived in all those different places. So definitely looking forward to exploring your framework, 7 forms of respect. Is there any high level insight you can give us from that?
Yes.
That we can.
Yes. Oh, here, I have a rubber band. So I'll leave your listeners with this. So there is the people, when they talk about respect, they often talk about the golden rule: treat people the way you want to be treated. Now, the problem with the golden rule is, what if they don't want to be treated the way you want to be treated? So I have what I call the rubber band rule. So here's a rubber band. And so with the rubber band rule, it shows that we are flexible, right? I can stretch for you. I know that you want to be respected in this way. And even though I don't care about it that much, I stretch for you. Think about how much we accommodate other people. And so what happens is we stretch and stretch and stretch for other people until we snap and break, like a rubber band. And so the point here is that I have to know what my breaking points are. My breaking points are going to be different than yours. And we all have breaking points. And so that means we have to know what respect means to us. It's actually a matter of self-respect. We have to be able to articulate that. We have to be able to practice curiosity around that. And even my rubber band is going to be different at work and home. Right? It's relative. And that's that the rubber, I think of it as the rubber band rule of respect, that respect is relative.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. It's been so nice chatting with you. I loved all of the things that you bring into this very brief conversation and interaction. Just your authenticity shows up so well, and you're so good at teaching. I don't know if that's your intent, but
Thank you.
maybe it's the
Especially coming
communication.
from you.
Clear communication. I don't know what you're talking about. The clear communication and just being able to impact so much in such a short time. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for sharing. Is there anything else you want to add before I go to my final closing question?
Ooh. If you want to learn more, please check out my TEDx talk, Curiosity as a Practice. So I'll just add that.
Thank you. I will drop that link in the show notes. If you're listening on audio, if you are on YouTube, we'll have that link as well in the comment section. So I'm looking forward to checking it out myself, Julie. Thank you. All right. So my final question is always about food, which is kind of interesting. Okay. If you were to share a dish that represents your culture with your co-workers, what would you pick and why?
Okay, I have a special version of Vietnamese spring rolls. And so this traditional Vietnamese spring rolls, they have rice noodles and some herbs and shrimp or tofu. My version of spring rolls is just a whole bunch of herbs and salmon, that's the Pacific Northwest part, mango, crunchy fried onions, no rice noodles. And so that's what I like to share. Julie's fish Vietnamese spring rolls.
Oh, okay. So if I come visit in Seattle, that's what you're gonna
yes
for me.
Yes. And you won't be able to get it anywhere else.
Okay, thank you so much, Julie. It's been nice chatting with you. For those that are listening, I would love to hear feedback from you. Please respond. How has this episode shaped your thoughts? And don't forget to leave us a review and share this with your network. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.